What if I told you that the most dangerous case of my career happened after I'd already turned in my badge? My name is Detective Frank Morrison, and for 35 years, I thought I'd seen every kind of evil this world had to offer. I was wrong, dead wrong. It was supposed to be my golden years. Golf on Tuesdays, fishing on weekends, and maybe finally reading all those crime novels I'd been putting off. But some habits die hard, and apparently, so do some mysteries. 3 months into retirement, I stumbled onto something that would make every case from my active duty look like a parking ticket. The phone rang at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in September. I remember the exact time because I was staring at my alarm clock, wondering if I'd ever get used to sleeping past sunrise. The voice on the other end was shaky, desperate. "Detective Morrison? This is Sarah Chen. I know you're retired, but I didn't know who else to call. My neighbor. Something's very wrong." Now you have to understand something about retirement. Everyone thinks you just flip a switch, and suddenly you're content with crossword puzzles and early bird specials. But when you've spent 3.5 decades chasing down the worst humanity has to offer, your brain doesn't just shut off. It's like a bloodhound that's caught a scent. Sarah Chen lived in Millbrook Heights, a quiet suburb about 20 minutes from my place. The kind of neighborhood where the biggest crime is usually someone forgetting to bring their garbage cans in. But Sarah's story was different. Her neighbor, an elderly man named Harold Winters, had been acting strange for weeks, really strange. "He's been digging," she told me when I arrived at her modest 2-story home. "Every night around midnight, I hear him digging in his backyard. But here's the thing, Detective Morrison, he fills the holes back up before dawn." I'd heard stranger things in my career, but something about the way Sarah said it made the hair on my arms stand up. Maybe it was the fear in her voice, or maybe it was the way she kept glancing toward the house next door, like she expected something to jump out at her. Harold Winters was 73 years old, a widower who'd moved to Millbrook Heights about 6 months earlier. According to Sarah, he'd seemed normal at first, quiet, kept to himself, but friendly enough. Then about 3 weeks ago, the digging started. "I confronted him about it," Sarah continued, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself despite the warm September air. "He just stared at me with these empty eyes. Said he was planting bulbs for spring. But, Detective, I looked over the fence the next morning. There were no bulbs, just disturbed earth, like he'd been digging for treasure or—" She didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what she was thinking. In my line of work, when someone's digging holes in the middle of the night, it's usually not for gardening. I should have walked away, should have told Sarah to call the local police if she was concerned. But here's the thing about being a detective for most of your adult life. You develop an instinct, and my instinct was screaming that something was very, very wrong with Harold Winters. That evening, I decided to do a little surveillance. Old habits, you know. I parked my car 3 blocks away and walked through the alley behind Harold's house. The property was surrounded by a 6-foot privacy fence, but there was a gap where 2 boards had come loose. Perfect viewing spot. At 11:47 p.m., Harold emerged from his house carrying a shovel and a large canvas bag. Even in the dim light from his back porch, I could see this wasn't an elderly man tending to his garden. His movements were purposeful, almost mechanical. He walked to a spot near the back corner of his yard and began digging. For the next hour and 15 minutes, I watched Harold Winters dig a hole roughly 3 feet deep and 4 feet wide. The canvas bag sat beside him, unopened. When he finished digging, he sat on the edge of the hole for almost 10 minutes, just staring down into it. Then he reached for the bag. What happened next still gives me chills. Harold opened the bag and carefully removed what appeared to be photographs. Not just a few photographs, dozens of them. He arranged them in the bottom of the hole like he was creating some kind of shrine. From my position, I couldn't make out what the photo showed, but I could see Harold's lips moving. He was talking to them. After arranging the photographs, Harold pulled something else from the bag. It was small, metallic, and caught the light from his porch. He held it up, said something I couldn't hear, then placed it carefully in the center of the photographs. Then he began filling in the hole. By 2:30 a.m., Harold had filled in the hole completely and smoothed the dirt over it. He gathered his shovel and the empty bag, took one last look at the disturbed earth, and went back inside his house. The entire ritual had taken almost 3 hours. I knew I was looking at something significant, but I didn't know what. The next morning, I called my old partner, Detective Ray Kowalski, who was still on active duty. "Frank, you need to let this go," Ray told me over coffee at our usual diner. "You're retired. Enjoy it. Play some golf." But I couldn't let it go. That night, I was back in the alley watching. Harold emerged at the same time, carrying the same shovel and canvas bag. But this time, he went to a different spot in the yard. The ritual was identical. Dig a hole, arrange photographs, place the metallic object, fill it in. On the third night, I brought binoculars and positioned myself in a different spot where I could get a better view. What I saw through those lenses changed everything. The photographs weren't random pictures. They were all of the same person, a young woman, maybe in her 20s, with dark hair and a bright smile. And the metallic object wasn't just any piece of metal. It was a locket, the kind someone might wear around their neck. The pieces started falling into place, but the picture they were forming was one I didn't want to see. I spent the next day doing what I did best, investigating. Harold Winters had indeed moved to Millbrook Heights 6 months earlier, but his previous address told a story. He'd lived in Cedar Falls, Iowa for 43 years, right up until his wife Margaret died in a car accident. But here's where it got interesting. The car accident wasn't Margaret's fault. According to the police report, she'd been hit by a drunk driver, a 24-year-old woman named Jessica Campbell. Jessica had been driving home from a party, blood alcohol level nearly twice the legal limit, when she ran a red light and slammed into Margaret's car at 50 miles per hour. Margaret Winters died instantly. Jessica Campbell walked away with minor injuries. I dug deeper. Jessica Campbell had been sentenced to 8 years in prison for vehicular manslaughter. She'd served 6 years and been released on parole just 7 months ago, 1 month before Harold Winters moved to Millbrook Heights. The coincidence was too convenient. I needed to know more about Jessica Campbell, and I needed to know it fast. That afternoon, I drove to Cedar Falls. It's a 5-hour drive, but I'd made longer trips chasing down leads. I spoke with Detective Maria Santos, who'd worked Margaret's case. She remembered Harold well. "Poor guy was devastated," she told me. "I mean, you expect that when someone loses their spouse. But Harold took it especially hard. He blamed himself, said he should have driven Margaret to her book club that night instead of letting her drive alone. He attended every day of Jessica Campbell's trial. Never said a word, just sat there staring at her. Detective Santos showed me photos from the trial. Harold looked like a broken man, but there was something else in his eyes when he looked at Jessica Campbell. Something that made my blood run cold. He left town right after Jessica was released, Detective Santos continued. Sold his house, got rid of everything. We figured he just couldn't handle being reminded of Margaret everywhere he looked. I asked about Jessica Campbell's current whereabouts. Detective Santos checked her computer. She's supposed to be living in Chicago, working at a call center, but she missed her last 2 check-ins with her parole officer. They've issued a warrant for her arrest. The drive back to Millbrook Heights felt like the longest 5 hours of my life. I had a theory, but I prayed I was wrong. Harold Winters wasn't just digging holes in his backyard. He was creating a shrine to the woman who'd killed his wife. But why? What was his end game? That night, I didn't just watch Harold's ritual. I followed him. After he finished his digging and went back inside, I waited 30 minutes, then crept into his backyard. Using a small flashlight, I examined the freshly filled hole. The dirt was loose, easy to move aside with my hands. 6 inches down, I found them. The photographs were all of Jessica Campbell, but they weren't normal photos. They were surveillance shots. Jessica leaving her apartment, Jessica at the grocery store, Jessica at work. Harold had been stalking her. The locket was more disturbing. It was engraved with the letter J and contained a small photo of Jessica. But the photo had been altered. Someone had drawn a red X across Jessica's face. I covered the hole back up and got out of there. The next morning, I called Detective Santos in Cedar Falls. "I need you to check something for me," I said. "Jessica Campbell's apartment in Chicago. I think she might be in trouble." The call back came 2 hours later. Jessica Campbell had been missing for 3 weeks. Her apartment showed signs of a struggle, but there was no body, no blood, no clear evidence of foul play. Chicago PD had assumed she'd skipped town to avoid her parole officer. But I knew better. Harold Winters had taken Jessica Campbell. The question was, what had he done with her? That night, I didn't wait for Harold's midnight ritual. I called Ray Kowalski and told him everything. By 10 p.m., we had a search warrant for Harold's house. What we found in his basement still haunts me. Harold had converted his basement into a prison. A small room, maybe 8 by 10 feet, with a single mattress on the floor and a bucket in the corner. The walls were covered with photos of Margaret Winters, and in the center of the room was a chair with leather restraints. We found Jessica Campbell in Harold's garage, locked in a wooden box barely large enough for her to lie down. She was alive, but barely, dehydrated, malnourished, and terrified beyond words. Harold had been keeping her prisoner for 3 weeks, forcing her to listen to him talk about Margaret, making her look at photos of the woman she'd killed. When we arrested Harold, he didn't resist. He just looked at me with those empty eyes Sarah Chen had described and said, "She needed to understand what she took from me." "And what was your plan, Harold?" I asked him. "Keep her locked up forever?" "I was going to bury her," he said matter-of-factly, "just like she buried Margaret. But I wanted her to suffer first. I wanted her to know what it felt like to have everything taken away." The trial was straightforward. Harold Winters was convicted of kidnapping and attempted murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jessica Campbell recovered physically, but the psychological scars will probably never heal. But here's what bothers me most about the case. Harold Winters wasn't a career criminal. He wasn't a psychopath or a sociopath. He was just a man who'd lost the love of his life and let his grief consume him until it turned into something monstrous. In my 35 years as a detective, I'd seen plenty of evil, but Harold's evil was different. It was born from love, twisted by loss, and nurtured by a desire for justice that had curdled into vengeance. It reminded me that sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones who were born bad. They're the ones who chose to become bad. Sarah Chen still lives in Millbrook Heights. She sends me a Christmas card every year thanking me for listening to her concerns. She says she still thinks about that case, still wonders what would have happened if she hadn't called me. I think about it too. Not just about Jessica Campbell, who might have died in that wooden box if Sarah hadn't been a concerned neighbor, but about Harold Winters and how grief can twist someone into something unrecognizable. These days, I actually do play golf on Tuesdays and fish on weekends, but I keep my detective instincts sharp, because you never know when someone's going to need an old cop who's learned that retirement doesn't mean you stop caring about justice. The moral of Harold's story isn't complicated. Grief is a powerful force, and if you let it consume you, it can turn you into the very thing you hate. Harold wanted justice for Margaret, but what he got was just another tragedy. Sometimes the most important cases aren't the ones that make the headlines. They're the ones that remind us that evil doesn't always announce itself with dramatic flourishes. Sometimes it whispers in your ear, promising that revenge will make the pain go away. Trust me, it never does.